All right, so I'm going to call the Neary Building Committee and the Neary Building Committee OPM Subcommittee to order, and note that there is a quorum present of both committees at this point. The first order of business is approval of the Neary Building Committee meeting minutes for June 6th of 2023. Were there any comments or questions on those? I will add that we do need to add the request for services to the bottom as an additional document referenced, as well as the agenda. But I can do that subject to other comments or questions on that.
Do you need a motion on that, Jason?
I do.
Jason, the only edit I had is the line.
There's no other edits.
The
Go ahead,
only
Andrew.
edit I had was on the adjournment line. They spelled your last name wrong. That was the only spelling test on that one.
Okay, so the adjournment line. Okay.
Yep.
I'll
All
move
right.
that we accept the minutes with the addition.
All right, I'll second it. Is there any further discussion? All right, we'll do roll call vote. So Denise,
Aye.
Andrew,
Aye.
Roger,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
and I am I as well. So that's a 5-0 vote for those. The next is, while the agenda calls for 2 sets of minutes, obviously the 2 meetings are very different. So next is a subcommittee meeting minutes for June 26th of 2023. The one item I would like to have added in is when I recused myself from the matter, I physically left the Zoom and didn't come back. So I'm going to propose we add a sentence to that effect. It's obviously very clear in the minutes, in the vote that actually ends up happening as well. So do others have comments on those?
No, but I think that's a good addition.
I agree.
I see Kathy's here, so I'm going to move her over, given that she's a member of the full building committee. Okay, I'm planning to abstain on those minutes. So can someone make a motion in a second on those?
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right.
Second.
Kathy, we're voting on subcommittee meeting minutes, so I will not be prompting you on this one. All right, Denise.
Yes.
Andrew.
I guess I'm
Aye.
gonna take over.
Roger.
Oh, aye. I'm sorry. We're voting.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Aye.
All right, Andrew, I heard an aye. Roger,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
and I'm going to abstain from those. Okay. At this point, given that I have stayed out of the OPM process, I think it's appropriate for me to go into the attendee part, and you can bring me back at the end once you get to the other business that may properly come before the committee. So what I'll ask is, Denise, if you want to run this part, given it's the subcommittee, and
Sure.
then Andrew, if you can just toggle me to attendees so that I'm out of the room and not part of the discussion, and then I'll come back in on the end.
I think you need to make me actual host instead of co-host.
That I can do. You should be good. And I have plenty of co-hosts to join you too there.
It doesn't look like I can move you to attendee.
All right. Why doesn't
I could put you on hold, but I don't know what that does.
you can't move me to attendee?
I could put on hold. That's the only thing I can do.
You know what I'll do is I will just log out of my town
Go through the
account
public link.
and just go into the public link.
Okay.
That way I'm completely out. So,
right.
All right. Thank you.
Question, Jason, are you coming back before we end the meeting, or?
I'll just be in the waiting room, and I can come
Okay.
back for other business if there is any, and then to adjourn. If you don't bring me back in, I'm not offended either. Totally fine.
Okay. All right, so on the agenda this evening is a discussion that we had regarding the vote that we took at the subcommittee meeting. And I would like to sort of have the Becky, the Director of Finance, fill us in on what's gone on. I think then we'll all know where we have to discuss or what we have to discuss. Becky?
So at the last meeting, the subcommittee did interview 4 candidates for the OPM for the NERI building project. The committee voted to move forward with Skanska as their first candidate, and then also voted that if we were unable to negotiate with Skanska, that we would move forward with negotiations with Vertex. Following that, we did ask our attorney to review the procurement process. And based on conversations with her, and also conversations with MSBA and the Attorney General's office, we were advised that we did need to move forward with the first ranked candidate, which was Vertex. And that the ranking was a compilation of both the rankings for the proposal and also the rankings for the interview that each committee member had put forward to me to compile. So at this point in time, we do have a decision to make as a committee in terms of moving forward with Vertex. We have been in touch with both firms. And have every, I guess, intention of submitting documentation to MSBA at this point regarding the procurement process. And Greg, I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add.
No, I think that's a great summary, Becky.
So I guess I'd like to open it up to the committee for comments and questions. One of the things I did ask, which my question is when we did the ranking, was it appropriate that the straw vote we took or the ranking that we actually did included those non-voting members, and whether or not the ranking should have just been the voting members, as a point of probably a legal question, which we should ask legal counsel, whether or not in this process, but whether it made a difference or not. Becky, did you look at that?
I did, and if we had removed Greg, Keith, and I and our rankings from it, it actually would have widened the gap, and Vertex would have been at 179, Skanska would have been at 171.75, Hill would have been 171, and Colliers would have been 170.5.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So Becky, what would have been only for the second round of votes, excluding the first round?
Vertex was still at the top at 89.71. Skanska was at 89.29. Colliers.
That's the combined score. Right?
No, that's for just the interviews. That's for all of us. That just the interviews. I can, if you want, I can share my screen.
Sure.
So this is just for the interviews. You can see that Vertex did come out still at the top for just the interviews. I have if you'd like to see, these are the proposal rankings. And again, Vertex was at the top in terms of the proposals that were submitted. And then if you combine both of those, so this was the overall ranking here with all the subcommittee members. And then down below, you can see that I've broken out if we were to remove Greg, Keith, and I in our rankings, how that would have played out.
But Becky, if I might, when you said you removed, yes, I see where you, what does it look like when just the 4 voting members are only used in calculating the interviews?
Wow.
The only thing we can do this exercise, but the only thing is the RFS did specifically state that we are going to combine both the proposal and the interviews.
I understand.
But Becky, where was that in the RFS? Because I couldn't find that. It just said that we would take it into consideration, not that we
Exactly.
would combine them with a rating. And I read it as take it into consideration for a re-rank.
Yes.
So if it was me, I think we would rescore everything, taking into consideration the first round, the second round, into a re-rank of an overall, using all of the questions from the first round and the second round, is how I read it. And again, we didn't come up in our last call because we didn't think it was going to be an issue. But that's how I would have read it, as once we do the interviews, we will re-rank based upon all of the questions that we have been asked during this entire process. Now that we have the referrals, of which we didn't have when we first ranked them, and then come up with a new score for the 4 for both 2 rounds using all the information available.
So this is the language I think you're referring to, Andrew. Following
Correct.
the interviews and/or collection of additional, the subcommittee will re-rank the shortlisted respondents based on all available information.
Correct.
Yes.
Re-rank, not combine our new rank with the old rank.
It
Correct.
does say, and I'm doing this, let me stop sharing my screen and I can find that information. It does talk about combining both of those in that document. If you'd give me a second, I will find that.
It's Mark. If you recall, I asked that question because I think I read the same darn thing, that it was a combination of the 2 votes. Or not the 2 votes, the 2 rankings. And my apologies, I can't get my video to work tonight.
Well, why Becky's looking that up, I think the email that went out, which, and we've already identified this, in which Becky says the directive that we're now dealing with was contrary to the information provided to us on that night. So had we had a different directive that night, the result, the result may very well have been different. I mean, the result was, I think the result that the result that occurred, right, was based on, I think, a combination of, at least for me, my understanding, my definition of what re-ranking meant, and that may not have been either correct or what other people thought. And also, I think I was pretty open about the fact that, my first pass through this, I was questioning my own scoring, and once I really was able to understand better the process, if I had, quote, re-ranked, and to me that meant rescore, that whole first pass would have been quite a bit different. Now, I understand that re-rank may not mean that. Maybe re-rank has a specific definition in the procurement process, but I think that since at least I understood, and I thought everyone else did, that we didn't have a directive that said, well, we have to choose the total of these scores. Otherwise, I certainly would have moved, to go back and effectively deal with I guess my own failure to score in a way that I thought was ultimately the right way, having nothing to do with how I assumed the result would, how I assumed the scoring would come out. I would have basically done that in a vacuum.
I agree with Roger 100%. I don't think we were under the impression that we were under a directive, because the language is not specific. It should use those numbers, but I agree with Roger, and And, you know, I think Mark is the one who said, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, putting words in your mouth, but I remember you saying, and I thought it was very apropos, that this is sort of very subjective. I mean, there's no, you know, cut and dry the way the numbers are being added up or being attributed. It's a very difficult process with not having a directive. Somebody said that. I thought it was Mark, but it's true.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I said something similar, Denise, where it was
Mhm.
the
Right.
questions weren't written in a scalable fashion,
Mhm.
right? The question was, you shall send financials, right? And I read that as, and I had to call Becky before we did it. I read that as, if you send them, you get 10 points. If you don't send them, you get 0. Right? It wasn't,
Yeah, you're right.
how do your financials relate, make us feel about the size of your company and the success that you would have on this project, which is what we ended up doing. So it was very subjective to how you read the question that was asked and how you scored it. So I don't know. I sticking directly to the scoring is tough, especially when we thought we had the ability to have external factors in our decision-making process.
Greg, you have your hand up.
You're on mute, Greg.
Thank you. I also want to just point out that the proposals were scored independently, and those scores were shared and averaged, right? The interviews, we each ranked the interviews independently and shared our scores, and those developed the aggregate score. So the question I have is, that was independent, that we can't then go back and say, well, I would have ranked differently because of Mark. Or now that I've heard Roger, I want to now go back and change my ranking. The independent ranking is based on your information that you're bringing forth to the group. That was my interpretation of it. So to be able to then go back and say, well, I'm going to change my score because I want to have X, Y, and Z as an outcome, to me, doesn't really follow the procurement process. Doesn't adhere to the procurement process.
Roger?
I'd just like to follow on one of the comments Greg made about a comment I made at the last meeting related to Mark. What I did say was that I would evaluate Mark's comments more significantly than mine, but I didn't say, so I want to go back and change all of my rankings to be the same as Mark's, because I wouldn't even look at Mark's rankings, if I had done a reevaluation. I wouldn't have looked at the outcome, but I would have looked at the methodology I used, where I think you remember I said, I got all 10s and 9s and, maybe an 8 here and there. And that was just the wrong methodology. Now, hey, it could have come out totally different, and probably would have. And I don't know that result would have resulted in Skanska being first or second or third or someone else. I just didn't understand that we were locked into a ranking process, which I already knew on my own, for me, was flawed. And I go back to what, I go back to the statement that we did not understand that directive. That was not what we understood when we went through the process. Had we understood that directive, well, I think we should have understood that directive. So, now it's where are we and what do we do about it?
Andrew, you have your hand up.
Actually, so I also, when I first thought of this, we were ranking, not scoring, ranking. We talked about the initial score, but the re-rank of the shortlisted respondents, and a ranking isn't a scoring. A ranking is 1 through 4, who was our favorite, which is what we got to when we said, who were everybody's top two, and it was Vertex and Skanska. And then we all said who was our favorite. And I think from a rank, scoring agnostic, Skanska was the favorite.
Mhm.
And it's also based upon all available information, but not limited to the initial ranking scores. You know, and again, I think from a ranking perspective, if we number them, forget the scoring, if we numbered 1 through 4 for both rounds for our favorites of the 4 voting members, I don't think Vertex is number 1 if we all had to rank 1 through 4. And I think that's what we should be held accountable to, is the ranking, not the scoring.
That's a very valid point. It's a very valid point. And I think too, if you look, when Becky put up the final scores of just that night, there, what are they, 0.5%, 0.5 point apart? Becky?
Yep.
0.5 point.
And I think to Roger's point, what we were missing, if you look at the scores, like mine were somewhere between 88 and 75. I was a lot more stringent, whereas other people were, and it was like 95 to 100, right? We were missing the scale of which and how to score them, which I think is what's throwing off the overall score. But if you stack rank them, you know, scoring apart and did, this is 1, 2, 3, 4 of Roger, this is 1, 2, 3, 4 of Denise, 1, 2, 3, 4 of Mark, and 1, 2, 3, 4 of Andrew, and added that up, right? You know, I think and looked at that, I think it wouldn't be a different story than the scores that we gave. Because there's nothing to justify, you know, me giving an 88 versus Roger giving a 99.
Becky, you have a hand up?
So I just want to speak to the procurement process because, you know, we've participated and we've done a lot of procurement in-house. I've participated in some with other districts where as part of a collective group purchasing. And this is a very common way of doing the rankings and doing the procurement. These questions, for both the proposal and for this, are questions that have been asked as part of the MSBA project. The RFS document was very prescribed by MSBA and did outline, you know, all of the things that we were supposed to rank or we were supposed to score these firms on. And I mean, it is our own subjective when we're reading through it, what stands out to us. It absolutely is. But that's how we come up with, I think, the total number is by everyone reading through it, getting their thoughts, getting their impressions, and then taking those numbers. And that's how we come up with a final total. Is it a perfect process? I mean, procurement is never, I don't know, it's always interesting every time we do one of these. But that is the process that, you know, I've been involved in many other situations.
Roger?
3 quick comments. First of all, to follow Andrew's, I think scale is very important. Clearly, one of the things that I didn't understand, at least on the first pass, and as Andrew said, you know, and I also want to continue to make a distinction between ranking and scoring because I think that's critical. And as I'll come back to that. So if I'm sitting there with a scale, with a 99, 98, 97, because, well, that's the difference between whatever it's the difference. And Andrew has a, you know, an 85, 80, and 75 with a difference of 5 in each one of those. The scale that I'm operating on, really because of lack of knowledge. I mean, you know, I think we all probably realize we didn't have much time to do this. You know, there were factors that compressed this process, which probably was one of the reasons it was flawed. Because if I had more time to talk about the scoring, I would have made a completely different decision in the way I approached it. Not the numbers necessarily, but at least the scale and the way I approached it. Now, back to ranking versus scoring. So when we understand that we can re-rank. That doesn't mean rescore to me. It means re-rank, and rank is the result of a lot of things. To me, not just the scores. For example, someone was probably going to say, well, you know, the references were very important to me. Nowhere on the nowhere in the scoring did references even exist. So does that mean that we shouldn't have taken into account references at all because they didn't exist on the scoring? I certainly took them into account on my ranking, of these firms. So just a couple of comments.
Becky, do you have your hand up again, or has it just been up?
I just wanted to, I think, speak to Roger, what you just said. In terms of re-ranking, though, we would need those scores in order to have some sort of backup. We would need to have some sort of justification if our re-ranking or if our ranking was to differ from the scores. So we need all of this backup, and in case there is some sort of a bid dispute or some sort of MSBA comes back to us looking for this information, we need to be able to justify, well, this is why we ranked them this way. And so typically those scores are what informs them of that ranking.
Greg, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just say that I completely agree, there's a difference between scoring and ranking, but you can't be arbitrary in how you get your rank. And we all had the same scoring guide. Yes, there could have been more clarity around, 0 to 2, a 3 to 5, in terms of how we would score. But what was standardized is we all brought our own knowledge and experience around this work, which varies, to come up with our individual scores. And I think we can't then say, well, our scores are X and our rank is going to be different from our scores. Otherwise, why are we scoring? And that's how, we've gone through a lot of procurement processes as a district in terms of how we go about coming up with, the top bid. This is not a skew of what we've used in the past, as Becky has mentioned. We have, we've used similar processes. Is it perfect? By no means. And I think you're bringing up some of the, the ways we can improve it in the future. But for this process, it is the process that we use. We identified criteria. We had a scale. We didn't articulate what that scale, how to differentiate between the scale, but the scale is constant. And what was constant is we all brought our own experience to coming up with a rank.
Andrew?
I think the only concern is that in the rank or the score, we're supposed to be doing it on all available information, including the first round scores and information received through references. So I would say, Roger, to your point exactly, I think we should score the references and see where we end up after that. Because I think that swayed my ranking, but we didn't score the references. And I would give Skanska a much superior score over Vertex on the references. And we did talk about that at that meeting. So prior to, selecting one versus the other, I think everybody spoke that Skanska's references were glowing and Vertex's were good. And if we had scored that, I think that most likely would have been enough to push the half a point in Skanska's favor. And if we did that, Becky, I think that's plenty of ammunition for MSBA.
Roger?
Jason, I actually put my hand up before yours was up, but then I took it down and put it up so I would follow you, wondering what you were going to say. And this issue of scoring is precisely, I think what you described is exactly what I felt happened. And I almost felt it happened with the entire committee. The strength of the references was so overpowering that it made a difference in a re-rank, if you will. Now, I understand it's possible that someone could say, Well, but scoring wasn't, but references weren't part of the score. Well, then I have to ask, why do we get references at all if it doesn't help us to rank these folks? If there's no place to use references in an evaluation of who we'd like to see get this work, why do we do it at all? I don't understand.
But Roger, we indicated in the RFS that we will include both including but not limited to the initial ranking scores, which we included, and information received through reference checks. So if the reference checks had no, in the re-rank / rescore had no impact, then we didn't follow the language of the RFS, and we should score the references and add them to the overall score.
That's a very good point, because if the references didn't matter, as Roger said, then why did we even read them? They should have been part of the evaluation. They should have had a score. And we did say that night that the references were important and that we all read the references. And I remember Keith saying, I kept trying, or Becky kept trying to get somebody to say that Scansa wasn't, that something bad about them. So if the references weren't important, then we should not have given them any weight, not read them, and just based our scoring on what we had in front of us, which I think is a problem. Roger?
So yeah, I did say, so why do we even have references? To more or less prove a point. I absolutely believe references are extremely important, especially for me, where I don't know any of these folks. And when I make decisions outside of this forum, in trying to evaluate, other firms, references are huge. And Andrew pointed out that it actually identifies that references should be a part of the ranking, if you will, which is different than the scoring.
Greg, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is that you're talking about design of the scoring. And you're asking to go back now and change the design of the scoring, whether it's adding a scale, whether it's adding points for references, and you're not wrong that the design could have been different, but it didn't include scoring of references.
But Greg, we said it would. It was not including but not limited to. It was including.
Becky, can you bring up the RFP?
So it's page 5.
I don't have it in front of me.
I'll put it up. Or she's got, okay. Including but not limited to initial ranking scores and information received through reference checks. So if we missed that in our scoring, we told them we were going to take that into consideration, and we did not.
Becky, did you find that talked about the highest score? Did you find that?
So this is the section that I was thinking that I was referring to, where we would include the initial ranking scores. That's what we were talking about earlier.
So I think, Roger, you had your hand up again?
Well, all I'm doing is a me too on this. I mean, I think this is very clearly stated, and and it's an important statement.
It is.
Again, we will recommend the top ranked respondent, not the top scored. Ranking is not scoring. If it was the top scored respondent, I understand there's some procurement law concerns there, but that's not what we wrote here.
The same argument could be, why did we have any ranking scoring then?
I don't know. And I mean, I do these all day long. I mean, normally you have a subjective question that says, can this person deliver plans or do designs, or do they have a project manager that's qualified? and you say yes, no, somewhat, agree, disagree, right? You have a scale like that. And we didn't have that, and the questions were misleading, and it was very hard to score. I think looking at it from this is what we want to assess people on, and we can say that this is the questions we want to ask, and they need to fulfill them, yes or no. And it's a disqualification, like the one company that didn't send us financials, right? They get a 0, right? I think it's basically everybody, it should have, the way I read it initially was all of these questions were basically pass fail. Did you or did you not provide the information requested? Do you have experience doing lead certification building? Yes. Not what is our assessment of your level of lead certification and whether or not that will work for this project. That wasn't the question they answered. That wasn't what we were asked to vote on. And we were supposed to read between the lines between what they said and what we wanted. It wasn't spelled out very clearly. And I think that's the problem we had on the scoring of the first round. And we didn't discuss the questions prior to us scoring. That's why we have such a spread of different ones. And I had the issue. I initially scored everybody basically 1 or 0. It was binary. Either you did it all and you got 10 points, or you didn't send it and you didn't have the experience, or you didn't send an org chart, or you didn't send us that you were a certified architect, and you got a 0. But I had to go back and kind of tweak that, but it wasn't intuitive in the scoring sheets or the instructions on how we were supposed to do that.
Mark, you have your hand up?
Yeah. Let me go way back and just ask a couple simple questions. If we walk out tonight and Skanska is our choice, what is the downside? What are we looking at? Are we saying that SBA will have trouble with that decision? Are we saying that there's a potential lawsuit from Vertex? What's the negative?
Becky?
If we were to move forward with Skanska, I think that we would have a Vertex would be able to dispute that. I think we would have to almost throw this out and start over again if that was the way we wanted to move forward.
Then my follow-up is, if we walk out tonight and say, with everyone's comments taken into consideration, that Vertex is our first choice, what's the downside risk? Is it the same that Skanska would point to the rankings and say, look, I've got a lawsuit here? I guess my question turns out, no matter, we're now in a situation, no matter what we do, I think we're walking down a road where somebody's going to be aggrieved. And tell me if I'm wrong. If there's a choice to be made and we know that the state is going to back us, then that's probably an easier choice. I'm one to suggest, and it's going to screw up our scheduling, that maybe the only alternative is to put it back out for review with whatever clear guidelines we want to clarify. I'm worried that we're kind of walking down a path now where we're going to be sued by one aggrieved party or another. And I don't know what the solution is. Let me back up one other section. I took the references when I hire a person, and I don't, but when I did years ago, I would break it down to my 1 or 2 candidates that I really liked. And then I would go out and contact all their references. And if one was higher than the other and all the references were good, that's the person I hire. If there was a negative in there, I would be digging into it to determine whether that's something I should overlook or what's the reason for the negative. I always look at references as, we've made a choice, here's our choice, Now the references need to fit into that picture. If there's something egregious, somebody has 8 lawsuits against these people, then our choice is clear, but that's not the case here. And I don't want to go down the road of ranking references. But personally, because I didn't listen to the actual reference discussion. So I can only take that as somebody else who listened to it, took notes, got written comments, and summarized it. But I'm just worried we're kind of walking down a path and there isn't going to be a happy end one way or the other.
Let me ask, Roger, before I take your question, I want to ask a question to Becky and to Greg. If we did start the process over, what is your feeling about how the SBA would take that? And secondly, how does it push us back time-wise?
From a timing perspective, we would have already missed. So we were trying to move forward and bring the OPM to the August MSBA meeting. They had outlined 2 potential dates to us, August and September. We would have already missed the September deadlines to make that committee because that process had to start, I think, July 5th. You had to have your RFS out on the market. So we would be looking at a potential October date if MSBA has OPM selection meetings. I don't know what their schedule is, if they do those monthly or if they only schedule those at certain points during the year.
Roger?
So on the what if, what happens if we come out of tonight's meeting with again with Skanska? I think, and all of Mark's comments, I've listened to them. I think a lot of it, or at least a significant part of coming out with, even though it's the same decision really, is why. Mm-hmm. I think if we can defend why and basically back that up, with the communications we've made, I think that puts us in better stead than if we can't. And I think it does come back to that, to the communication that we had, which says, look, references are important. And I know Greg had said, well, then why do we do the scoring at all? Well, the reason we do the scoring, and I thought that maybe that's a bit facetious, maybe not, is, well, the scoring gets us to the second phase, right? The scoring gets us to, determining who we're going to have in for interviews. You don't do references before that. And the scoring also, I think, it's a measure, that gets, to part of the answer. But as we've stated, the other part of the answer is the references. And, I think the phrase "blown away by the references," came through in the meeting we had. So I think that we all decided that there were 2 candidates that were close, but there was such a difference in the references that made the decision. It wasn't a hard decision. I mean, we were pretty much unanimous on where we went. So I don't think that's a bad reason. I think that's a very defendable reason. Now, if other people think differently, well, that's their right.
I'd like to add one thing, and I don't mean this to be picky, but it keeps coming back in my mind, the 44 versus 144. When Vertex said that they had 144 versus 44, and then we sort of argued that possibly it was dual, certifications, that they counted those people separately. That to me was a little bit of misconception, which bothered me. I will tell you that. If somebody has civil engineering and then has a building license, is that the reason why the number is wrong? Because the number was wrong. I mean, they certainly know how many people they have. It's a minor thing, obviously, but it's like, I couldn't figure that out. And we couldn't that night. If you remember correctly, we discussed it and we said, well, maybe it's because these certifications, they decided to take each one of them as a separate entity and a different person, which is not the case. Mark?
Oh, I'm sorry. My hand stayed raised. No, it's off.
Anybody else have any comments before we try to decide what to do here? Greg?
I think that, again, I just want to go back to, we're pointing out questions about the design of the process. So I think that no matter what you look at in terms of a decision the committee is going to make, that people have questions around the design of the procurement and the criteria and the scoring and the ranking and clarity of how references are or are not used. And I think that should be considered from the board, regardless of going with either choice, either Skanska or Vertex, because it's true either way, that when we ranked for Skanska, as an example, or we score for Skanska, we didn't have more specific criteria around the bands of 1 to 100, for example. It was based on our own experience and how we ranked or scored each criteria. So my point is, regardless, the process was used for all firms that we evaluated. Everyone's pointing out changes we could have made to the process, but that's the process we had outlined. So I guess,
Greg, it's not. I mean, the adding of the scores wasn't laid out. I didn't even know we were sending scores. I didn't understand that from what we had. It wasn't laid out in the RFS. And at the end of the day, you rank these things. And we're not doing what we said in the RFS. I understand the mechanics of how we interpreted the RFS, and we did that, came out this way. But it says we recommend, based upon our ranking, we recommended Skanska. That's it. And we didn't recommend Vertex. And the motion was Vertex as a backup if Skanska's negotiations failed. So if Skanska didn't want to do the project, then we go to Vertex. It was never that we allowed Vertex if our scoring methodology or our ranking methodology was wrong. I don't think we've given authority for Vertex to go forward. And I
have to agree. There was no motion for that. Right now,
this is the largest construction project this town has ever done. Mm-hmm. And to start off like this, I'd rather wait till October, November to get this right. If we can't, all 4 voting members, including 4 out of the 5 non-voting members, preferred Skanska. So to go forward with Vertex and take the opportunity or the chance that they're not successful, not that they wouldn't be, I think they would be great. It's just starting off this multi-year, up to a $90, $100 million project off on the wrong foot. And it scares me that we're already here.
Roger?
I've actually, and this has been a great conversation for me to hear. I'm actually now at peace with the process. I actually feel we did follow the process, and I feel that in spite of the issue with scoring and what I feel was a failure on my part in scoring, et cetera, I think when you come right down to the paragraph that Andrew put up, which is the process, it basically says you need to take into consideration the rankings. Now, whatever we call rankings, whether we call it the scoring or whether we call it whatever, and in addition to that, you need to take into consideration the references. So, however we ended up with these numbers that were very close, and let's stay with them. Okay, Skanska and Vertex, top of the heap. All right, either one. Okay, without any references, might be fine. And then you put the references in there, which we clearly stated, this is part of our process. And you put those references in there, it clearly, resulted in the Skanska choice. So I'm now not embarrassed about how I scored it. Okay. The scoring, or whatever we want to call it, came out pretty close. The references weren't close. And by the way, Denise, your point about some information, that once we talked through some information about Vertex, and I'm sure that this could have been, I'm sure we could have talked about some other firms, except we were down to discussing the last two. I missed that, so to some degree, I'm glad that we had a chance to talk about it. I would have gone back and rescored, okay, if I had understood, if I had focused on that part, but I didn't. My scores were my scores. We ended up with two very close choices, and the references, as our document said, were taken into consideration and made the decision easy, I thought.
Mark, you had your hand up again?
Yeah, I agree with Roger. Yes, I expressed myself that night that it was an incredibly frustrating process to figure out how to do the scoring. But in hindsight, I'm very happy with what I did. Let me, because I can't recall, when we got done with the two scores added together, Skanska was number one. Am I incorrect?
No, Vertex was number one. Skanska was number two by
By
minor.
what?
Yeah.
By 50 basis points, half a percent.
A 0.5%, period.
And I remember in the meeting, we said, oh, that's really close. But I think, we said, we think we like Skanska more because of the referrals and the references. And then Roger brought up, oh, well, our scores are kind of all over the place. I don't know if we did it the right way. And it was, well, do we have to go by the scores? And it was said in that meeting that, no, we have the ability to add some, taking this additional consideration with like the references. And that's why we went with Skanska. Then I just don't know what the step forward is at this point. I mean, we're coming with a proposal to approve for Vertex. So did we not even have a choice? Can we go back, or do we need to start over? I mean,
I think it's a pleasure of this committee to decide how we're going to do this. One of the things that I believe is if you go out to bid on a bus contract, if you find out that somebody who's the highest bidder, there's a reason why you can't go with them, as long as you can justify it. Whether this will hold true in this situation or not, can we? And I think to Roger's point, can we justify the fact that the recommendations were just so glowing and a 0.5% to justify what we did? And I think somebody made the point, and I think it's true. Mark, I think we could probably be in litigation on both sides. I don't know. Becky, how did Skanska take it? I know they must have been disappointed, but are they amenable, thinking, okay, well, this is all right, or do you see something coming from behind?
We did share the rankings with them. We have not heard back. Greg and I did have a conversation with them. And we, like I said, we have not heard back from them. But I think once they realized that they were not the top ranked, they understood.
Roger, you have your hand up again.
So I have a suggestion on where we go from here. I think we are where we are because the attorneys, right, had advised, right, the district that we have to move forward with the highest score, or we're violating a procurement process. But I don't know if it was pointed out. I mean, there's a lot of data here. If we haven't done this, I'd recommend that we go back and talk to the attorneys and point out, look, the actual process that we documented said, yes, we go with rankings, but we also include the references. And in a situation where, the quote, whatever you want to call it, scoring even was very close, and the references were so compelling, that's why we made the decision according to the process that we documented. And I would wonder if the attorneys consider that, and maybe because maybe they haven't, okay, they'd come out with the same recommendation. But I mean, that's one of the things we can do from here, find out what the reaction is. And if we had to have another meeting, okay, before we move, I don't think anybody would object to that.
Greg?
So I think one of the things that, as we move forward with these processes, that they are complex and we can't be rushing them. I do feel, from my perspective, that this was a very rushed process. We were trying to meet deadlines on a schedule during a time of year that were very difficult to meet. For me, it's just an opportunity to pause and say, we can't be driven by deadlines that doesn't allow us to really think through carefully around each step. That's just a general comment. I feel like this process has been rushed. I feel like the timing of the process has not been great. I understand that MSBA drives some of these deadlines and timelines, but honestly, from my perspective as a superintendent, I rather slow things down and get them right than move forward with processes that we know people aren't feeling 100% comfortable with, and this isn't, I'm talking about just in general. And this is one example of a process that I felt really rushed from my perspective.
Mark, did you have your hand back up again, or is it still up?
Yes, because I wanted to hear Greg's comments before I made mine, and I'm glad I did. That was exactly what I was going to say. I felt the process was very hurried. I'm really concerned that if we aren't really careful how we would put this back out to bid and not take all our biases off the table, I don't know how that can be done, but I think we're in a bind. I happen to agree. I have no problems with our decision. I have no problems justifying it, but there's a downside to that. And I agree, we shouldn't be starting this process and this project with a problem. And if there's a perceived problem, then we should sit back and say, okay, let's put the darn thing out to bid, but we need to really be specific how we're going to do this, how we're going to grade this, and whether the state needs to aid a little bit in how that's done. I think we just have to be very careful with the process going forward. I think it's ripe for even further problems unless we think this thing through. Even the questions, I have no problem with the effort and everything else that was done to put those questions together. But maybe as a committee, we should have looked at some of those in advance. Maybe we should have had a chance to kind of go through those things. And I happen to agree. I think this could be a blemish if we don't handle it correctly. And my earlier question was, I don't think there's an easy solution other than to pause and put the darn thing out to bid. And if our schedule gets pushed out, so be it. We're trying to rectify something and do it right.
Andrew?
Just one question. Becky, do we have to have a subcommittee, or could this be done by the full Neary Building Committee?
The RFS document that MSBA had given us did call for a subcommittee.
Okay. Could the subcommittee in theory be all the members of the committee? I'm just, it's one of those when we were talking about making sure that we have everybody's voice. When Mark, mentioned that, like, I don't know how we get around, kind of biases. It might be to add new members, right? Maybe other members of the committee that have joined recently. But just a thought.
I think the subcommittee obviously isn't the full committee because then it's not a subcommittee. And I think when Jason set it up, he said we needed 5 members and we really didn't have too many takers over 5 members. I think we should decide and give a direction to Greg and to Becky tonight as to what we want to do. Do we want to seek additional legal counsel? Although I do think that probably the answer is not going to change. Do we want to take a stand and push forward with one or the other? Skanska, who we obviously have great reason to want to keep because of the recommendations, or do we want to start the process over? There are like 3 different options here. Some of them may be, grouped together, but I think we need to decide on a direction tonight. And I think Greg had a very good comment when he said he doesn't want to rush it. And I also think that Andrew had the best comment when he said this is a very expensive project for this town and we cannot afford to do this, with questions in people's minds. And I think, Skans is probably sitting back saying, okay, what are we going to do now? We were voted on. There is a record of that vote. And the second vote was a backup vote if our negotiations with the firm did not become positive or they backed out for any reason. The reason I asked for a second was so we wouldn't have to come back together again and we'd already have it. So I guess my first question would be we should vote on whether or not in the global picture, whether we feel we should go out and start the process over again. Because if we all feel that we should start it over again, then these other issues really don't matter. So does anyone have an objection to that, of seeing whether we should start the process over again?
I think if we're forced into a second choice for all of the voting members of the committee, then we should. If legal counsel, to Roger's point, rereads it and says, oh yeah, you could take into referrals, and if that pushes them over, that's okay. Mm-hmm. And then Skanska could be the selection, I have less of a concern, but I have an overall concern that somebody's going to be angry, and I don't want, I think if we feel in general we've been rushed and 2 people are going to be aggrieved and we're going to have a whole situation with that, then maybe we start it over again. But I kind of defer to, especially Greg, in your comments, if whether or not, I don't know if moving, pushing this to October messes with our, I don't know, 2028 plans of a school implementation. Like, are we losing a whole year by waiting a couple months, or is it just literally just a couple months?
Greg, Becky, anybody have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sooner we can begin the process, I think the better it is in terms of timelines, making sure that we get the project accomplished sooner than later. However, I think this is a multi-year, a many-year project. I don't think there will be opportunities to find, in my opinion, find time. There'll be other opportunities to save time without compromising the integrity of the process over the course of the project. I'm not so much concerned about the August. And again, this is from my perspective as a superintendent, August, October differentiation.
Roger?
Well, I find myself in another one of these situations where I think that other opinions are really more valuable than mine on some subjects. And certainly Greg's comment about feeling the process was rushed, I think is more, and that the result of the rushed process means that we should probably do a reset here. So Well, I think the process, well, I do think the process was rushed. I think we all felt it was rushed. I think we worked pretty hard to deal with a rushed process and try to come out with a good decision. So if people believe that we made a bad decision because we didn't have as much time as we would have preferred to make that decision, then I can accept that the thing we ought to do is, let's go ahead and put it out again. I don't think so. I mean, I felt rushed, but I don't believe that the fact that I didn't have more time, I tried to accommodate, for the fact that we had a lot to do in a short time. And in thinking about my vote, okay, on who to choose, it wouldn't have changed if we had a little more time. At least I don't think we made a bad decision because of the time constraint. So if other people think that they made a bad decision, because of the time constraint, then go ahead and put it back out there. But I'm curious if other people, I mean, Mark, you made the comment about also this whole rush process. Do you think that you made a bad vote because of the time involved, or you just, or are you thinking, well, we didn't have a lot of time, but I'm pretty comfortable with who we chose?
I am pretty comfortable with who we chose and what we did to get to that point. However, if we're being advised that this could precipitate into an aggrieved party taking action, then I have a problem with that, because then we're dead in the water until that gets resolved. If we have two parties that are saying, no, we have issues with this, then I think we need to step back and make sure that we define the rules and we do it correct. And I think in the long run, we're going to be better off unless Vertex says, nope, we're okay, go ahead and take Scansa, or Scansa says the opposite. I don't think either one's going to say that. So much that I think, yes, we were rushed, B, for a host of other issues, this is the decision we made, and in all honesty, I'm happy with it. But if there were repercussions and those make our project delayed even further, then we're better off doing it all over again. And I would like to consider the ability of, if there are new members to the committee, that they be in the process, and that may help the whole process, having a few more opinions down the road. I mean, if I were one of the other proponents, would I bid the second time? I'm not sure, but maybe there's going to be another bidder that comes out of the woodworks that we get blown by, because it isn't rushed. So there could be a silver lining to this whole thing.
The only concern that I have is if we all have a preconceived notion, we know who we thought was the best for the job, and then we start ranking again, and it comes out to be that this is who we zero in on, we're gonna get bows and arrows at us that, well, you rigged the whole thing to do it again. That's my concern. And I see Roger shaking his head.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Denise. I think that's certainly, I think, Roger, to your question, I think we made a rushed, but I think we came to the right conclusion.
I do too.
Right. And I think it's, it's like buying a house. When you see the one that you love, you know it. I think we picked the right company. Although there was a lot of very good qualified companies. But I think what we rushed might have been, the process, the scoring, and how we had to do it. It didn't line up with our choice, right? So I think that's the part that I don't feel as good with. But if we can figure out a way that our choice that we're comfortable with can continue to be the choice, that I don't see that we need to necessarily go back out. But if, to Mark's point, if it's going to be a legal issue, or it's just a procurement nightmare, and the only way to do it is to start over fresh with different criteria and more refined scoring, ranking, whatever, then we might have to do that. But, you know, I would prefer not to do that.
Greg, before I take your question, I want to ask you a question that you or Becky could answer when you do speak. If we were to say that we want to stay with Skanska and we say, you know, we used which is what we did, we used the recommendations, is that enough evidence to push that into a situation where that is above and beyond? Because as Andrew's point is very well taken, it's right in the document. It says that we would take that into consideration. If we're not taking into consideration, then we shouldn't have even looked at those. There has to be a way to use those. And I believe that's what the committee did. They used those. Greg?
Yeah, I just want to be clear around what part of the process I felt rushed. And that is the back end of the process, developing the interview questions, developing the you know, the rubrics, the scoring, not necessarily rushed in the conversation, the input that each of you provided, but rather than the back end of getting these documents prepared and to go out to bid. I just wanted to clarify that. In terms of, you know, I think moving forward, and I think if the board takes no action and then it's already voted Skanska, then we'll have to, you know, obviously I would check back with legal counsel. And then Becky would need to get in touch with MSBA, I guess, and we need to have some phone calls and communications.
Roger?
I would like to again encourage, and I guess it would be through a vote, I'm not sure, the committee to ask the district to check with legal. In other words, the language in the document seems extraordinarily clear to me, but it's not necessarily. But if somebody's focused on the scoring, they may not even read that. So I would really like to know what the attorney would say if we point out, look, we think we followed the process. We went through scoring, we went through ranking, we had two very close choices, and the document clearly, the process clearly just told us that we needed to include references as the other part. One part is the ranking, the other part of the references. And it was unanimous that the references, you know, put us over the top, and we were following the process. So if the attorney comes back and he says, you know what, I read that language. I know Denise, you suggested that they might say the same thing, but I kind of want to know if the attorney comes back and says, you know what, I read that language and here's where you're wrong. Here's where you saying that references were an important part of the process that you used, even though it says that's in the document, here's where you're legally wrong. Well, I'd accept that. I'd accept that as a reason to change my position, but I'd really like to know if they say that, and if they do, can explain why they're saying that, because I think that's pretty powerful. I mean, I think to me, it's clear. You know, I'm a closet lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but always, you know, wished I had been, probably for all the wrong reasons. So that's what I would still like to propose. And I don't know that, I'm not sure I'd recommend action until we got the answer to that question, but.
I think our position is defensible because we did use those recommendations. It was a long conversation about recommendations, a long conversation. And that's what differentiated the two, you know, and I think that is a defensible position, which I would hopefully would use with the building assistants, mass building assistants, as well as with legal counsel, that's our defensible position. They were a half a point apart, and we looked at them and we looked at the references. And remember, we didn't get the references till that night. And the references, can I ask, Becky, can I ask you a question? The first set of questions, were those were actually authored by the state, correct?
That's correct.
And then our questions were authored by the district, right?
We authored them, but we used previously used questions from other MSBA projects.
Okay. Mark, do you have another question?
Yeah, yes. Our deliberations were taped, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that tape available for the public?
You can go online and listen to the whole hearing.
I think it's just the first part. I think once we got, I don't know, Greg, if the second part has made it onto YouTube yet.
Is that the part where we were disconnected because Zoom was over?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that is or not, but once it is, it will be there.
Well, here's to Roger's point. I happen to agree, and I would take it one step further. I would ask our attorney to go ahead and view our deliberations, and our conclusion is we're okay with it. Our conclusion is it was the references that made a difference. And does that deliberation, go listen to it, does that support our conclusion? And if his answer is yes, then we've got a double reason to stick to what our choice is. He can look at the regulations and determine, yes, we followed them. But two, he can take a look at our deliberations and does that support what we're saying?
Mm-hmm. Again, why would they even mention references if they had no validity and no weight in the decision process? And I think that's exactly what we're saying. So why I would suggest that we direct the district to go to legal counsel with our concerns and our position, and then I guess come back and we'll set another meeting to decide what we're going to do. Because I think you're going to have a problem legally with either of these two companies. I just can feel it in my bones that one of them, I don't think one of them is going to be happy, and neither one's going to be happy. And the next thing you know, both of them are going to be unhappy. So I don't think that we're avoiding a problem. But listen, I've been wrong before. I hope I'm wrong. I just don't think I am. So I don't think we need a vote, but Greg, you had your hand up.
Just a quick question for Becky in terms of process with MSBA. Can you just talk about where we are and what we need to do to meet deadlines?
So we do have to submit the OPM narrative to the MSBA. A red line draft has been sent to them, just outlining the process, summary of what went on. And that was the document that I forwarded to each of you earlier today. From there, we finalize that document. And then the next steps would be that at the August meeting, of the MSBA meeting, that's typically when the OPM that we selected would do a presentation to MSBA, and they would approve us to move forward and sign the contract with the OPM firm.
Greg, did you want to comment before I say anything?
No, thank you, Becky.
So we need 48 hours to post a meeting, and today is already Thursday. So I guess I'll consult with Jason to see perhaps if we can post another meeting like this one after you get your opinion back. And it shouldn't take long to get an opinion, correct?
Well,
No,
I think we can basically state that if we go back to the attorneys with what Roger mentioned and they say, oh, okay, yeah, then you're fine, then we don't need a meeting, right? Just go forward with Skanska and but without assuming that could work, right? But I don't know if we need to vote on the narrative before it gets sent to MSBA.
Well, the narrative that I saw today has doesn't have Skanska in it. So
correct. And then has that been sent to MSBA already?
We did need to get that in to them by the 12th. So it is a red line. So it is a draft pending this meeting. They did know that we were meeting tonight.
And did they know that one of the edits might be the person that we selected?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think that probably with what Andrew said is probably correct, that we don't need another meeting, but I think that we have to wait and see what council says and then go from there. And if council says this is going to be a problem, which I think it's going to be a problem either way, then we need to have a meeting. Anybody have any comments about that? So I don't think we need a vote to get a legal opinion. So I guess I would ask you to get a legal opinion for us.
For those watching the video, we just rejoined. We got kicked out of our original Zoom meeting, and Greg, we hear the
Really? I blame Jason.
He's not here, so he has broad shoulders.
Hey, Greg.
Yes, sorry. Hang
That's
on.
right. You found the video, but thank you.
So I guess we'll.
That sounds familiar. And I was like, I know that guy.
So I guess we'll
He's
direct.
gonna be thrilled that we're all waiting for him.
We might as well start the way we end the way we started.
I know, right? Exactly.
Sayonara, actually.
Greg, it's all playing through your.
I'm having pretty serious storms.
Really? Oh, wow. So I guess we're going to direct the district to secure a legal opinion, and then if we need a meeting, we will post it. Does that all sound appropriate? Any other comments?
The only other comment is do we want to direct that we don't want to move forward with sending anything to MSBA with Vertex as our selection?
100%. We probably should vote on that. That's a very good point. I would entertain a motion.
I move that the NERI OPM Subcommittee instructs the district to not have Vertex be our selection to MSBA.
I have a second. It's been moved in second. Roll call vote. Roger?
Yes, aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Andrew? Mark?
Aye.
And I'm aye, 4-0. All right, so we'll wait to hear back from the superintendent, and I will move to adjourn. I have a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second, cool. Roger,
aye.
Andrew,
Aye.
Mark,
I, with a footnote, leave Jason in the waiting room permanently, and maybe he'll get the message he's not welcome back.
and I am aye. So
Can I ask a question? Now Kathy's here, but she wasn't involved in the vote?
no, this is
Because
voted
it was a
late.
posted meeting for the other committee as well. So
Okay, I understand.
she's
Thank-
just hanging out and listening.
Well,
Yeah, this vote was the subcommittee vote.
okay, I understand. Thank you.
All right, so I guess we'll adjourn. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll wait to see what happens.
I'm headed out to roll my car windows up based on what Greg said.
That's a good plan.
Good night,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody.
All right, good
Thank
night.
Hey, Greg, welcome back.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.